I got to the hospital in 11 minutes. I know because I was watching the clock on the dashboard the whole drive, the way you do when your hands are steady but your chest isn't. The roads were clear. It was a Tuesday in February, the kind of cold that makes the air feel thin, and the parking lot at St. Michael's had a thin layer of ice that nobody had sorted yet. I walked carefully. I remember thinking, don't fall. Not now. My daughter was sitting in a chair outside the emergency waiting area when I found her. Not inside. Outside, in the corridor near the vending machines, with her coat still on and her boots soaked through. My grandson was asleep against her shoulder. He was 4 years old and he had a little hat with a bear on it that she'd knitted herself, and he was holding it even in his sleep. She looked up at me and her face did something I hadn't seen it do since she was a child. It just collapsed. "She fired me, Mom," she said. She walked into the office and told everyone I was let go, in front of the whole floor, and then she said if I made a scene, she'd make sure I never worked in property management in this city again. I sat down beside her. I didn't say anything yet. And then last night, she called Derek's phone and told him that if he wanted to keep his position in the company, his father's company, Mom, he needed to make some decisions about us, about where we were living, about who was raising Eli. I looked at Eli sleeping. His little mouth was open. He had a cracker in his fist that he hadn't finished. Derek chose, my daughter said. He didn't even argue with her. He chose. I put my arm around her. I let her cry. And then I said, "Are you hungry? When did you last eat something?" She laughed a little, the way you do when the question is so small against everything that's happening. "I don't know. This morning, maybe." "Okay," I said. "Let's get Eli into the car before he wakes up cold. And then we're going to Tim's, and you're going to eat something, and you're going to tell me everything." She thought I was just being a mother, taking her home, feeding her soup, letting her cry in a warm kitchen. That's what she thought this was. She had no idea that I had been watching her mother-in-law for almost 2 years. Her name is Renata Holbrook. I'll say that plainly because she earned it. She married into money. Holbrook Development, one of the older real estate firms in the Ottawa Valley, the kind that has a plaque in the lobby and a family name on 3 buildings downtown. Her husband, Gordon, died 6 years ago and left the company to their only son, Derek, on the condition that Renata remain on the board as long as she chose to. Gordon had been a reasonable man, from what I understood. Renata was something else. I met her at the engagement dinner. She shook my hand and looked at me the way you look at something you're trying to place, like she was calculating something. My daughter was glowing. Derek seemed nervous. Renata talked about the Holbrook family for most of the meal, the kinds of contributions they'd made, the kinds of events they attended. She mentioned my daughter's name exactly once the whole evening. I didn't say anything that night. I'm 64 years old. I have learned when to keep my mouth closed and when to let people show me who they are. She showed me. Over the next 3 years, she showed me a great deal. It started with small things, the way she'd call my daughter Derek's wife at family gatherings instead of her name, the comments about how my daughter dressed for company events, the time she sent back a dish my daughter had brought to Thanksgiving with a note about dietary sensitivities that nobody in that family actually had. The job at Holbrook Property Solutions had seemed like a gift when Renata offered it. My daughter had a background in tenant relations. She was good at her work. People liked her. But within a year it became a cage. Renata scheduled her shifts, approved her vacation, determined her title, and began slowly and deliberately to make my daughter feel like everything she had, the job, the house they lived in which was owned by the company, the car registered under the company name, could be taken away. Coercive control doesn't always look like what people expect. Sometimes it looks like generosity. It looks like being included. And then one day you look around and you realize every door you might walk through belongs to someone else. My daughter didn't see it for a long time. I think she was afraid to. I saw it from about 18 months in. And I started keeping a record. I'm retired now, but I spent 31 years as a paralegal at a firm in Kanata. Wills, estates, property disputes. That was my world. I understand documentation. I understand what holds up and what doesn't. I know how to read a land transfer, a lease agreement, a corporate filing. I started with the property. The house my daughter and Derek lived in was owned by Holbrook Property Solutions as a company asset. That was how Renata had presented it, a benefit of Derek's position, a family home, a gift. What she had never mentioned, and what my daughter didn't know to ask about, was that the arrangement had never been formalized in any lease, meaning my daughter had no legal standing as a tenant. Renata could ask them to leave with notice. If Derek's employment was terminated or restructured, the house would revert, which meant my daughter's home was contingent on Renata's goodwill. I wrote that down. I kept writing. I requested corporate filings through the Ontario Business Registry. They're public records. Anyone can pull them. I looked at the board structure. I looked at the registered directors. I noted that since Gordon's death, 3 of the original 5 board members had been replaced with people directly connected to Renata. I noted that Derek's signing authority had been quietly narrowed in an amendment filed 14 months earlier. He didn't have the power he thought he had. I called an old colleague of mine, a woman I'd worked alongside for 20 years before she went on to become a family law lawyer in the Peen. We had coffee. I brought the folder. She read it carefully, and then she looked up at me and said, "Who's all this for?" "My daughter," I said. "Not yet, but I think she's going to need it." My colleague set down her coffee. "You've been sitting on this." "I've been building it," I said. "There's a difference." She nodded slowly. "There's more you should get," she said. And she told me what. The morning after, I picked my daughter up from the hospital. She'd gone in because she hadn't slept in 2 days and her blood pressure had spiked, which she hadn't even told me until we were in the car. I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop and my folder, and I made a list. Ely was asleep in the guest room. My daughter was on the couch with a blanket I'd had since she was a teenager. The house was quiet. Outside, the February light was coming up slow and grey over the backyard. I called my colleague at 8 in the morning. She picked up on the second ring. "She fired my daughter yesterday," I said, in front of the whole office. A pause. Then we move. What we had when I laid it out, documentation of the informal housing arrangement and its precarity, a record of workplace incidents, some of which my daughter had reported internally, none of which had been investigated because Renata chaired the HR Oversight Committee. Emails my daughter had forwarded to me over the past year, not because she thought they were evidence, just because she was upset and needed someone to read them. And what they showed, read in sequence, was a deliberate pattern of isolation and control. I had timestamps, I had names, and I had something else. 18 months earlier, I had done something that I hadn't told my daughter about. I hadn't told anyone, really, except my accountant and the lawyer who handled the transaction. I had purchased a small piece of land. It was a commercial property, just over 1/3 of an acre, in a part of the Ottawa Valley that Holbrook Development had been quietly assembling for a new project. A mixed-use development, the kind that gets announced with renderings and a press release and a promise of community consultation. The land assembly had been mostly complete when one parcel came up, a small lot between 2 others that the family had already acquired, owned by an elderly man who hadn't been interested in selling to a developer. He was interested in selling to me. We'd met through my church. He knew what I planned to do with it, which was hold it until it mattered. In property development, there's a term for this. It's called a holdout parcel. Without it, you can't build what you promised. Without it, your financing contingencies don't hold. Without it, the whole project stalls. Renata Holbrook's flagship project, the one she'd been presenting to the board, to investors, to the city planning committee, could not proceed without my signature. I had not offered my signature. I had been waiting. My daughter found out the same way Renata did, which is that my colleague sent a formal letter. It went to Holbrook Development's corporate counsel on a Thursday morning. It outlined my daughter's wrongful dismissal claim, the housing situation and its legal implications, and the question of Derek's diminished signing authority, and whether he had in fact consented to any of the recent board changes while adequately informed of their implications. It also, as a matter of routine disclosure, noted my ownership of the holdout parcel and my client's, my daughter's, interest in any resolution that might facilitate or impede the project's timeline. I was in my kitchen when my daughter called me. It was just after noon. "Mom," her voice was strange, flat and bright at the same time. How long have you had this?" "Sit down," I said. "I'll make tea. Come over." She came. We sat at the table. I told her everything in order, the way I've just told you. She didn't interrupt. She's a quiet person, my daughter. She processes things slowly and then all at once. Halfway through, she put her face in her hands, not crying, just holding herself still. When I was done, she looked up. "You did all of this without telling me?" "Yes." "Why?" I thought about how to say it. "Because you were still hoping it would be okay," I said finally. "And I didn't want to take that from you before you were ready, but I wanted to be ready for when you were." She was quiet for a long time. "What about Derek?" she asked. It was the question she'd been circling for 2 days. "That's yours," I said. "I can't answer that one for you. I can only make sure you have choices, real ones, not the kind Renata was handing you." The response from Renata came 4 days later, not through her corporate lawyer, through Derek. He called my daughter on a Sunday evening, and I know what was said because she told me that night, sitting at my table again with a cup of tea going cold. He said he hadn't known about the board changes. He said he hadn't known about the HR file. He said his mother had assured him that everything with the job had been a mutual decision, and he had believed her because it was easier to believe her than to ask the questions he should have been asking for 3 years. Whether that's true, I don't know. I've learned that I didn't know and I didn't want to know can look nearly identical from the outside. He asked my daughter if there was any way to fix it. She asked him what he thought needed fixing. He said, "Everything." She told him she'd think about it. The settlement took 6 weeks to negotiate. My colleague was thorough, which meant she was slow, which was fine. The wrongful dismissal claim was resolved with a severance package that reflected my daughter's actual tenure and contribution, not the diminished role Renata had been describing in internal documents. The housing situation was formalized. Derek and my daughter were given a 5-year lease at a nominal rate, while they made their own arrangements, which gave them time and legal ground to stand on. Renata remained on the board. That was Derek's line, and I think it was the one concession my daughter gave him. But my colleague had quietly ensured that the recent board amendments were reviewed, and 2 of the 3 that had narrowed Derek's authority were reversed. As for the land, I sold it, not to Holbrook Development. Not directly. I sold it to a small development trust that had been looking for exactly that kind of parcel, with a right of first offer clause for Holbrook to acquire it from them at fair market value within 90 days. They exercised it. The project moved forward. The price I sold it was fair. I didn't gouge anyone. I'm not built that way. But the price was mine to set, and it was considerably more than I had paid, and the proceeds went into a registered education savings account for Eli. The paperwork was signed the same week as the settlement. My daughter called me when it cleared. "How much?" she asked. I told her. She was quiet for a moment. "Ellie doesn't even know what university is yet." "No," I said, "but he will. I want to say something about Derek because I think it's the part that doesn't have a clean ending. He's not a bad man. I've watched him with Eli, and there is nothing wrong with the way he loves that child. He is, however, a man who spent 36 years learning that his mother's version of events was the one that held, and that the cost of questioning her was too high to pay. That's not innocence, exactly. It's a particular kind of damage that can look a lot like character from certain angles. He and my daughter are still together. They're working on it. They've been seeing a counselor in Stittsville, a woman who specializes in family systems, and from what my daughter tells me, the sessions are hard in the way that useful things often are. I don't ask too many questions. That part of the story belongs to them. Renata and I have not spoken directly since before any of this happened. At Eli's 5th birthday party in April, she was there. I was there. We were in the same backyard for 2 hours. She did not approach me. I did not approach her. At one point, we were standing perhaps 6 feet apart near the dessert table, and she looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite name. Not anger. Something quieter than that. Recognition, maybe. I looked back. I didn't smile, but I wasn't unkind. She left before the cake. My daughter asked me once, after everything settled, whether I had ever been afraid, whether I had doubted the plan, worried that it would fall apart, that I'd held on too long or moved too soon. I told her yes, more than once. There was a period, maybe 8 months before she called me from the hospital, when I thought I might have it wrong, when I wondered if I was reading too much into things, building a case out of patterns that might just be the ordinary friction of difficult people. I'm 64, not infallible. I've been wrong before, but then I'd go back to the folder. I'd read the emails again. I'd look at the dates, the sequence, the way one thing followed another too neatly to be coincidence. And I'd remind myself of something a senior partner at the firm used to tell junior staff when they second-guessed their instincts. Document it. Don't react yet. Document it. So I did. There's something I want to say to anyone watching this who is standing where my daughter was standing. Not in the specifics of it. Most people don't have a holdout parcel sitting in their back pocket, and I know that. But in the feeling of it, the feeling that the ground beneath you has been quietly sold off by someone who smiled at you the whole time. It starts small. A comment. A favor that turns into a condition. A slow, careful arrangement of the world around you until you look up one day and every door has someone else's name on it. If that's where you are, I want you to know something. Document it. Don't react yet. Breathe. And then document it. Because the thing about people who build their power on quietly taking yours is that they leave a paper trail. They can't help it. Every little grab, every tiny rearrangement, it leaves a mark if you know how to look. And someday, when you're ready, that record is yours.